Hello, CS112. So we'll be going over Quick Solutions Lab 5, which has to do with multidimensional lists. In this lab, you were supposed to create a function called filter score where you were given a data set. This data set was a multidimensional array where each element was a sublist with the following structure. You would have an integer student ID, a string student name, and a an integer student score. It was your job to parse each of these sublists and determine which of these students has the max score, so the highest score, and then you were to return that sublist at the end. So I'm just going to dive right into it. So the very first thing we want to figure out how to do, since we're all new with multidimensional lists, is how we can actually access each of these scores. So in this example I'm running with here, how can I get the 55, the 62, and the 93? So I'm just going to start printing stuff out to sort of debug and figure out how I can get there. So I know I need to use a loop, obviously, because we need to loop through and get to our stuff, but let's actually figure out what we're printing out here. So if I was to just do a casual print I, so print I, if I was to print I in this situation, what would happen? Well, my terminal has frozen up on me. Okay, I'm not sure what that was about, but now we can run Python cat.py. And okay, so it has printed out the indexes. So it has printed out the 0th sublist, the first sublist, and the second sublist, and they're represented as their indices. So now how do I actually how can I actually start getting data? Well, if I was to index each of these, so if I was to just print out, let's say data set I, what would that do? Well, data set I would actually get, would actually give us each of the sublists. So now we're a little closer, but we don't just want data set I. We don't want the entire thing. We want data set I 0, 1, 2. We want their second index. So now if I was to print out data set I2, now I can directly access each of their scores. So we know that we're keeping track of their scores at data set I2 as we iterate through data set. So I want to create a couple of variables up here. The first to set max score equal to -1. The reason I'm setting it equal to -1 is because that's some weird indentation there. The reason I'm setting it equal to -1 is because we're guaranteed good input, so their scores will always be greater than -1. And I'm also going to keep track of the location of this, of wherever the max score is located, and I'm also going to set that equal to -1 just to be safe, because again, we're guaranteed good input, so we don't really have to verify anything. So again, we're going to be working with dataset I2 because that represents each of their scores within the thing. So the first thing I'm going to do is check if dataset I2 is going to be greater than the max current score that we have. And if it is, I'm going to set max score equal to dataset I2. So now that I'm going to be actually tracking and keeping track of dataset I2, and which is the max score, I also want to keep track of the location of the current max score. So I'm going to say location is equal to I, because remember, I is actually telling us the location inside of the list of where that max score is. That's just plain old I. So just to kind of eyeball this code and what would get down here, when we first check dataset I2, 55 is going to be greater than -1. So I'm going to set my max score equal to 55, and I'm going to keep track of the location 0 because this is the 0th index. We're going to go on again, and it's going to check if dataset I2 is greater than our max score, which is currently set at 55, and 62 is greater than 65. So again, we're going to overwrite our max score to 62, and then set our location equal to 1. Then the same thing is going to go, and we're going to end up overwriting our max score to 93, and then our location to 0, 1, 2. So lastly, we just want to return data sets at the location that we have found the max score to be, because this will return the entire sublist at that location, which is what we want as our return. So if I'm just going to go ahead and save and run that. And there we go. We got our max score there. I'm just going to really quickly run through that with all the test cases. And as you can see, I was able to get the expected output with these function calls. Now, I do think that it is important that you guys know how to index well, because that is going to be on your midterm. If you do have any questions, let me know, but I do think that with these lists, printing out before you actually dive into it to figure out where you are is always going to be a good idea.